Today, we're examining a major player in the microbial world, Staphylococcus aureus.
It really is.
It's earned its reputation as a superbug, but at the same time, it's living harmlessly on millions of us right now.
That's the duality, isn't it? It can be a quiet resident, but if it gets an opportunity...
The vulnerability.
Exactly. It instantly becomes a serious invader. Understanding this switch is, well, it's everything for anyone in infectious disease.
Okay, let's get into that. The name itself is, from what I understand, a perfect biological description.
It's wonderfully precise, yeah.
So what does Staphylococcus aureus literally mean?
You can break it into two parts. The first part, staphylo, that's from the Greek for a cluster of grapes.
Like a bunch of grapes.
Exactly what you see under a microscope. When you do a gram stain on this gram-positive bacterium, you see these little spherical cocci all clustered together.
So that's the shape. And the second part, aureus.
Aureus is just Latin for golden.
Golden.
Yes, it describes the color of the colonies when you grow them on a lab plate, something like a blood agar plate. They have this really distinctive golden yellow pigment. So the golden cluster of grapes, it's a perfect name.
One of the most surprising things about staph is just how common it is. What percentage of people are carrying this bacterium right now, completely unaware?
The number is high. I mean, it's around 25% of the population.
A quarter of all people.
A quarter of us are persistent carriers. It lives on our skin, but it really prefers moist areas. We find very high colonization rates in the nostrils, for example, and places like the armpits or the groin.
Okay, so for anyone in a clinical setting, this is the critical distinction. Colonization versus infection.
Yes.
One is fine, the other is a medical emergency. What's the biological trigger that separates them?
It comes down to two things: bacterial load and the skin barrier. Colonization is just a low level of bacteria on healthy, intact skin. The immune system has it under control.
But infection?
Infection is an invasion. You need a high number of bacteria, and crucially, you need a break in that skin barrier. The second that barrier is breached, the bacteria sense it, and they switch on their entire arsenal.
And a breach doesn't have to be a major wound, does it?
Not at all. That's the danger. It can be microscopic. Think about the tiny fissures from eczema or even just very dry skin. Or, of course, bigger things like a surgical cut, an injection site, or even a small nick from shaving.
And since the bacteria are already there.
They're ready to go. If a door opens, staph is usually the first one through.
Right, so it's a common neighbor. Now let's get into the weapons it uses. Staph is infamous for infecting medical implants.
Oh, yes. Artificial joints, catheters, prosthetic heart valves.
What's the specific defense that makes these infections so incredibly hard to treat?
In one word, biofilms. Staphylococcus aureus is an absolute master at building a protective fortress on these non-biological surfaces.
Describe this fortress. What is this biofilm made of, and why can't our antibiotics get through it?
Think of it like a castle wall made of a kind of biological slime. It's what we call an extracellular matrix.
Meaning it's outside the cells themselves.
Right. It's built primarily from complex sugars called exopolysaccharides. This slimy shield is a physical barrier. It literally stops the antibiotic molecules from reaching the bacteria hiding inside.
So the drug can't even get to its target.
It can't. And what's more, the bacteria inside the biofilm, they sort of go into a low power mode. They're less metabolically active, which makes many antibiotics less effective anyway.
And they share information inside.
They do. Inside that protected space, they swap resistance genes. It's like they're trading survival strategies, making the whole colony stronger against any future attacks.
That's why removing the infected hardware is often the only real solution. But staph also has chemical weapons toxins. Let's start with food safety. What's the toxin that causes staphylococcal food poisoning?
That would be the enterotoxin.
And what makes it so tricky?
It's resilience. So you have a food handler who is a carrier. Maybe they have staph in their nose and they contaminate some food that's then left out. The bacteria multiply and pump out this toxin.
But then you cook the food. That should solve it, right?
That's the false assumption. The staph bacteria themselves are killed by the heat, sure, but the enterotoxin they produced is remarkably heat stable.
So even after cooking?
The poison is still there. The toxin remains active and potent.
Can you give us specific numbers on that heat resistance?
It can withstand boiling, so 100 degrees Celsius, for several minutes without being neutralized.
Wow.
So the illness, the severe vomiting and diarrhea, it's caused by the preformed toxin, not a live infection. That's why it can happen so fast, sometimes just an hour or two after eating.
So reheating the leftovers is no guarantee of safety. Okay, let's talk about some of the more aggressive toxins. Give me two other potent examples.
One of the most notorious is Panton-Valentine leukocidin, PVL.
PVL. Then what does that do?
It's particularly nasty. It targets our white blood cells, our leukocyte.
The core of the immune system.
It punches holes directly into the membrane of those immune cells, killing them. This effectively cripples the local immune response and leads to massive tissue damage. PVL is heavily associated with those necrotizing, flesh-eating infections.
A weapon designed to disarm the first responders. What's the second example?
That would be the exfoliatin toxin. This one attacks the skin itself. It targets the specific proteins that hold our skin cells together.
The biological glue.
The glue, exactly. Specifically, molecules called desmoglein-1.
And when that glue is dissolved, what's the clinical result?
The result is a condition called staphylococcal scalded skin syndrome. The top layers of skin just slough off. It becomes red, painful, with large, fluid-filled blisters. It genuinely looks like the skin has been burned or scalded. It's a terrifying sight, particularly in children.
So we have an organism that's common, it's structurally shielded, and it's chemically armed. But maybe its most defining feature is how it adapts. Let's shift to the evolutionary arms race with antibiotics, starting with penicillin.
Right, penicillin was a miracle drug. It worked by shutting down a protein called PBP, the penicillin binding protein.
And PBP is essential for what?
For building the bacterial cell wall. No cell wall, the bacterium bursts and dies. It was a perfect weapon.
A perfect lock and key. For a while.
For a while, but staph very quickly evolved a countermeasure. It started producing enzymes called beta-lactamases.
And what do these enzymes do?
They're like molecular scissors. They're secreted by the bacteria, and they find the penicillin molecule and cut it. They break the core beta-lactam ring, neutralizing the drug before it can even do its job.
So the scientific community responded with a new drug, methicillin. How was that designed to get around this defense?
Methicillin was a brilliant bit of chemistry. It was designed so that its shape was different. The molecular scissors, the beta-lactamases, just couldn't get a grip on it to cut it.
So it worked.
It worked very well for a time against all the penicillin-resistant strains.
Which brings us to MRSA, methicillin resistance Staphylococcus aureus. How did the bacteria evolve to beat a drug that was specifically designed to be unbeatable by its last trick?
This is a classic case of evolution in action. The staph didn't just improve its defense, it changed the battlefield entirely. It acquired a new piece of DNA, a gene called MECA.
And what does the MECA gene do?
It gives the bacterium the instructions to build a brand new, completely different PBP protein, a substitute.
A new lock.
A new lock. It's often called PBP2A. And the methicillin molecule, our key, simply doesn't fit into this new lock. So the bacteria can just keep building its cell wall, completely ignoring the drug. It's a genetic bypass.
An incredible adaptation. Now, of course, MRSA is a huge problem. For years, vancomycin has been the last line of defense for serious infections. What's the threat level there?
The threat level is high, and it's growing. The evolutionary process is still happening. We are now seeing strains that are developing resistance to vancomycin.
Which is deeply concerning.
It's the erosion of our last major defensive wall.
Can you be more specific about those strains?
We classify them by their level of resistance. First, we started seeing VISA. That's vancomycin intermediate Staphylococcus aureus. You need higher and higher doses of the drug to kill them.
And then?
And then, the one we all feared, VRSA, vancomycin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. These strains are, for all practical purposes, completely resistant. It creates a massive therapeutic problem.
Is this resistance problem just confined to hospitals, what we call healthcare-associated MRSA?
No, and that's what's so frightening. We're seeing this adaptation in both the HA-MRSA strains from hospitals and in CA-MRSA, the community-associated strains.
Which are the ones that affect healthy people out in the world.
Exactly. And those CA-MRSA strains often carry other nasty toxins like PBL. If those widespread community strains become fully resistant to vancomycin, the potential for untreatable infections goes up dramatically.
It's just a staggering journey. We start with Staphylococcus aureus as this common, mostly harmless organism.
A normal part of our flora.
And we end with it having this incredible adaptive arsenal. Biofilms for physical defense, powerful toxins that destroy tissue and immune cells, and this ability to swap genes and rewrite its own operating system in real time. It's evolution happening right in front of us.
It absolutely is. Staph is a constant reminder that our relationship with the microbial world is dynamic. It is not static. For every move we make, we have to anticipate a countermove.
So that brings us to the final question we want to leave you with. Since staph consistently evolves new defenses by literally changing the locks on its doors, what new approaches are needed? We can't just keep making new keys. Maybe we need to think about managing colonization differently, or finding new ways to protect that skin barrier in the first place. How do we get ahead in this microscopic arms race? That is the fundamental challenge.